welcome to another episode of our research series program where we explore the ideas shaping our world. Now we have joined by an economist, Jas Grandmaster, and a social scientist, David Smerdon. His work delves deeply into how social norms, particularly the negative ones, persist and what we can do to change them. So David, welcome to the faculty and to this research series. How do you do?
Thanks very much for having me. Yes, it's the final week of my visit here to UGM and to Indonesia, it's been a fantastic trip, and I felt very welcome here.
Thank you. Hopefully, it's not going to be your last visit to Indonesia, and
I
we can
not.
do future collaboration with us again. Yes. Right. So let's start with the first question. Yeah. So you have been studying the persistence of harmful social norms for some time now, and we as readers or viewers, we probably don't have a good understanding on the definition of harmful social norms. So can you please elaborate what it means and what inspired you to do this, to study this phenomenon?
So this is something that I've been interested in since my master's studies. Actually, my undergraduate wasn't in economics. It was in mathematics and psychology. And social norms have been the discipline for psychology for a long time. The study of these informal rules, kind of like customs or traditions that help govern a society's behavior. And only in recent decades, economists have looked into social norms and provided some value, mainly through the tools of game theory. But one thing that I noticed as a master's student in economics, having studied social norms in my psychology undergraduate, is that economics could only explain good social norms. So informal rules that make society better, help us to coordinate, increase efficiency, and there was no economic explanation for why harmful social norms could exist. But looking at other literatures like historical literatures, ethnographic research, there are some clear examples of very harmful practices that seem to be social norms and that last a very long time. And so I saw this disconnect between what we observed as real problems and what economics could explain, and that was enough to get me interested in studying it.
Wow, interesting. You argue that harmful norms often start as a good one, so it's not a constantly bad thing, but started from a good one. Can you provide like a real-world example that illustrates this transformation?
Yep. So I should first admit that this is not my original argument. I wasn't the first to come up with it. I was the first economist to model it in this way, but historians for quite a long time have argued that the most damaging customs and traditions actually made some sense at some time, and then gradually payoffs would change. So a good example of this is handshaking. Now, it's a strange way to greet someone by literally gripping their skin, but it's a very strong social norm. You can imagine how you would feel if you weren't allowed to shake someone's hand, but they didn't know it and they put out their hand to greet you, and you just left their hand there. You feel very uncomfortable, and vice versa as well. So the social pressure is very strong that you must shake a hand if it's extended. But we know that this is how germs spread, and there are many other alternatives that we could have for handshaking. So the question is, why do we have this practice? And the answer, if you go back through history, is that a long time ago, when tribes or clans would meet for the first time, the leaders would greet each other, and they wanted to show that they didn't have a weapon, and the weapon is usually a small sword or a dagger or a knife. And so the original handshakes were actually two-handed handshakes. They would shake hands like this, and the other hands would, you might have seen in old movies like Gladiator, they do like this. And so back in those days, they didn't know about germs, and they wanted to show that they were coming in peace. So it started as a good norm. Now, we don't carry weapons very often, and we know about germs. But the social norm, the pressures are so strong that we've kept it going. And just by accident, in my master's thesis, which was in 2017, I wrote that handshaking is such a strong global norm, the only way we could ever get rid of it is if there was a huge global pandemic. Then 2 years later it happened.
And that happened.
Yeah.
Wow, interesting. And yeah, how then like social identity, like gender and things like that, have play a role in reinforcing these norms?
Yeah, so one of the key components that makes a social norm what it is that before you decide how to act, you don't just consider your own payoffs, so what's good for me or bad for me. Like, for example, should I smoke or not? I might think, well, there are health consequences, but I like the taste, and so I'm thinking like an economist. But you also think to yourself, what's everybody else doing who I care about, and what do they think that I should do? And the everybody else, is your social group. So that's where social identity plays a role. Now, sometimes your social identity can change. So for instance, in some situations, it will be all of Indonesia if you're an Indonesian. So what does the average Indonesian think? Other times with smoking, particularly in Indonesia, it's what do Indonesian men think? It's very gender specific. Yep. The difference in Indonesia between men and women rates of smoking is one of the largest in the world, in fact. So your group can change depending on the question you're trying to answer. But the common feature is that there's always a set of people with a similar identity to you, which may be nationality, gender, age, religion, or your friendship circle, where you want to do the same as them. You care about your own payoffs, but you really want to do the same. So imagine you're in a group of 3 friends. It makes sense that you are all smokers or you are all not smokers. But if you're very close friends who do everything together and one's a smoker and the other isn't, it's not a great coordination. Someone's always going to be a little bit unhappy. So that can lead to a majority actually choosing the minority's preference just so long as you all choose the same thing.
All right. Now, I'm going to move on to like the experimental study that you have done in the past few years. And to all viewers and readers of this podcast, experiments are often used to validate or to verify theories or to prove whether the hypothesis is correct or not. And David have done a lot of experiments, and we are wondering what results from lab experiments that you have found to be the most surprising things, particularly if we relate that with the social norms or harmful social norms that you have explained before.
Yeah. So my master's thesis started off very theoretical. In economics, as you know, but perhaps our listeners don't, theoretical means just math. So my primary supervisor was he's one of the top theoretical microeconomists, and he's in the Netherlands. I studied in Amsterdam. And so he taught me about the value of mathematical models to explain human behavior. That didn't sit very easily with me because I saw these real problems out there and I couldn't see the connection between equations and what I was seeing there. And I noticed that at UGM, your economics department is much more applied focused, and most of your students will learn much more about the connection to real issues, particularly affecting Indonesia in the labor market or wherever else. So I was very much in that school of thought, and I couldn't see the connection. But then my supervisors helped me to understand that providing an opposing theory to the existing models in math could then be tested through these lab experiments. And if you could show that people act better according to your theory, then that theory can actually be expanded to then be used to address real-world problems, which is where I eventually got to, and I think we'll talk about later. So it was the first time I'd run a lab experiment, and it was also the first time that I appreciated what the math was for, because I wrote a big mathematical model, lots of equations, which gave an explanation for how bad norms could emerge from starting as good norms, and then people could be stuck there and unable to get rid of them. And I showed that the classical model said that this wouldn't happen. The original model said that those bad norms, over time, the group could get rid of them. My model said that they couldn't. And then we tested it in the lab. And the good thing about an experiment, the exciting thing is you really don't know what will happen. And I'd invested a lot of time and a bit of money. And I was sort of watching these Dutch students clicking buttons on the computer, but knowing that either the original model would be supported or my model, and there was no middle ground. And I sort of just watched and watched and watched. And eventually it was shown that under the conditions that I had, hypothesized, indeed, the Dutch students in the lab got stuck in a bad norm and they couldn't shake it. And they knew, we interviewed them afterwards, they knew that it was a bad norm. They knew that everybody should switch to the new one, but they couldn't coordinate to do it just as the model predicted. So it was still reasonably abstract. It wasn't hitting those real world bad social norms like smoking, like female genital cutting, child marriage, these real problems that affect the world. But it was the first step for me seeing that these crazy ideas in my mind actually maybe had some merit.
Yeah, and you also found that even like anonymous communication and transparency can help break these bad or harmful norms. Yeah, and you also already mentioned like how it is going to be applied in real life situation. Can you elaborate more about that?
Yeah. So what I really wanted to do after demonstrating that the theory held was to provide some evidence, even in an artificial lab setting, about what policymakers could use if they wanted to try to break down a bad norm. And to do that, we experimented with a few mechanisms, like you mentioned, anonymity and communication. And the anonymity one was very interesting because even though my model was an improvement on past models, I noted when I was writing it that it predicted anonymous signaling wouldn't have any effect. And I didn't believe that that was true. So in a way, I was proposing something that was kind of going to hurt my own model, but I thought, I just can't believe it. And one of the inspirations for me was the uprising called the Arab Spring. Something that's been studied a lot, mainly in the social and political sciences. And this was the idea that at some point a majority might actually have a problem with the existing regime or some of the practices that the government's in place, but it's very hard to signal to people, hey, I've got a problem with this, who else is with me? Because if you're wrong and you're the only one, then it's obviously very, very costly. Yeah. It was actually, there's a few studies that have shown that WhatsApp and other communication tools on bulletin boards where you could anonymously spread the signal, hey, I'm against this, made a big difference because people felt that there were now mechanisms where they could, without revealing their identity and risking punishment, signal, I'm one of the people who will oppose it and who else is with me. And from that, they could get information about this majority who wanted change. And I trialed that in the experiment and it was incredibly successful. And that was actually something that then led to me wanting to take that from the lab in Amsterdam to the field in Africa.
Wow, that's interesting. Looking forward to the result of your research. Then. Right, so I'm going to back to your PhD journey, where you are probably one of the first economics paper to explore the concept of pluralistic ignorance. It sounds like a mass ignorance. Is that like the correct interpretation of that term?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. Again, my background, a very accidental background, actually helped me a lot because I'd studied this term in my undergraduate psychology studies, and I found it fascinating, and I saw that it's basically just a footnote in a social psychology textbook, and that was it, but it stuck in my brain. And when I was running the social norms experiments, it came back to me, this idea. And the definition of pluralistic ignorance is when a majority of people in a group don't like what the current social norm behavior is, but they also mistakenly think that everybody else does like it. So a majority thinks that they're the minority. And a very accessible example of this, I'm sure you've experienced it like me, is when you lecture and you say, you give a big piece of content, difficult content, and then you say, does anybody not understand this? Put your hand up. And nobody puts their hand up. And so we, of course, assume, well, they all understood it because we're brilliant lecturers. But each individual student who doesn't get it, they look around and nobody else is putting their hand up, so they think I'm the only one who didn't get it. But it could be the whole class didn't understand it. So a majority of people mistakenly think that they're the minority and they keep quiet. And when they keep quiet, that also reinforces the signal because other people mistakenly think, oh, I'm in the minority. And this concept, again, doesn't fit very well with economic theory because we assume that people's beliefs are rational. So what we believe about the majority opinion is actually correct in reality. But sometimes that's not the case, and it can be hard to shake it if you don't feel safe enough to signal your true beliefs, such as in Arab Spring type uprisings. If you don't feel safe to signal dissent, then you mistakenly look around and see that nobody's protesting and they must love the government. And it's fueled, of course, by things like fake news, government-controlled media, echo chambers, all these things from political science.
Okay. Is that also related with like culture? I mean, some cultures are probably not tended to not prohibit, yeah, but like discourage individualistic behavior, like raising your hand when asked questions.
I think it could be, yeah. There is some social science research that suggests that in more collectivist societies, it is more likely that it's pluralistic ignorance can emerge because it's more difficult to signal dissent. I've noticed that, I mean, typically with social norms, nothing is black and white. There's good and bad to a lot of things. So for instance, Indonesian culture I've noticed is incredibly polite compared to Australian culture.
Maybe too polite?
Well, that's the thing. So, I mean, the respect that students show me is fantastic and, makes me feel valued as an academic, and more so than in Australia, I would say. But on the other hand, it might lead students to be more hesitant to speak out critically, sometimes in ways that would actually be beneficial for everyone. So I guess it's, good and bad to all these things.
Yeah, interesting to explore more about that in research, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned before about the genital circumcision for female, and I think you've done that in Somalia, in Africa. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so this was a sort of a continuation of this pathway. The master's thesis was theoretical. The PhD got more into the lab experiments. And then I was very lucky that I took that idea and turned it into a proposal for a real world problem, female genital cutting in East Africa. I should mention quickly that the female genital cutting in Somalia and most of Africa is very different to female circumcision in Indonesia.
Oh, okay.
I think it's called sunat.
Sunat,
Yeah. The sunat in Indonesia is very minor, and in fact half of it the World Health Organization doesn't even consider female genital cutting. So there's a whole still discussion to have in the Indonesian context, but when I talk about FGC in Africa, it's something very different. Yeah, a much more serious medical procedure. In Somalia, 98% of girls have this procedure done to them, and usually at the age of 7 to 10. So not in Indonesia, where it's in a hospital when you're a baby. It's 7 to 10, and usually not by a trained professional, and it's much more severe. So the health consequences, bleeding, hemorrhaging, infection in the short term, and long term, the biggest one is maternal mortality. So when you give birth as a mother, the chances of you dying during childbirth are 40 times higher than in most other countries. So the UN and other bodies have tried to address this in different ways. It's illegal in Somalia. It can be you can go to jail if you're caught doing it, but there's no real rule of law, so it's never enforced. And the UN tried various approaches that worked in other countries, but it turns out that they were unsuccessful because in Somalia, one of the root causes is pluralistic ignorance, and it's very hard to measure. So I took this proposal to some professors at Bocconi University in Italy who had some funding to work in Somalia, and they got very interested. And fortunately, they took a chance on me because basically the evidence that I had was from Dutch university students. And now I'm going to look at mothers in rural Somalia. It's quite different. But I said, look, theoretically, it's the same. The intervention, giving them a way to anonymously signal their true beliefs should work. Would you be willing to take a chance? And they said yes, which meant that I designed some survey modules that we ran in Somalia to see whether pluralistic ignorance is likely to exist, and it ticked all the boxes. And then I designed an intervention. The intervention is what we call a randomized controlled trial. I know you're familiar with it, but for your listeners, it's essentially an experiment at big scale in the field. So I think about 80 villages were control villages. We surveyed parents who had daughters who were getting to that age where the female genital cutting would happen, and we just measured their characteristics, but we didn't intervene in any way. And then in the 80 villages with the treatment, same parents who had a daughter who's getting close, we ran a pluralistic ignorance treatment that was the same as the one in Amsterdam, and I'll explain it. In the villages, we would get all the men together in one room, all the women together in another room, and we would run something very, very simple. We would put a box that you might do for voting in an election, and we said, on a piece of paper, do you wish that female genital cutting was banned in your village, yes or no? And it's anonymous, so one by one they went behind into a room and they put the card in, so we did an anonymous vote. And then the second thing, we gave them another piece of paper with their name on it, and we said, guess the number of people in your room who want to get rid of it, who voted yes. And we will pay you money for the closest guess. So they had an incentive, and they wrote down their guesses. And then we took a back seat, we stood back and we let the village leader, chief, religious leader, count the votes out in front of them. So they knew that it was an internal counting. They saw the true number. In most of the villages, their guesses were way under the truth because they guessed, no, in our village, nobody wants to get rid of it. And then they saw, oh, the actual amount is 40%, the actual amount is 80%, whatever it was. And that was it, the entire treatment. So it's quite cheap to do. We brought a box and some paper, that was it. It wasn't, conditional cash transfer or big infrastructure change. And then we came back 18 months later, 1.5 years later, and the groups that had this poll, the FGC rate had gone down by 40% compared to the control.
That's great.
Massive difference. And another sign that it was pluralistic ignorance is that not every village went down by 40%. Some didn't go down and some went down almost completely. The ones with the biggest effect were the ones where they're underestimated by the most. So where their beliefs were the most incorrect. And just giving them this count that they did themselves was enough to correct the pluralistic ignorance.
Right. So your story is like in Somalia where the government facilitated with the RCT and you have like the funding to do that. But how do you think like policymakers in other countries that probably don't have that kind of luxury of having you, for example, to visit and do research, how can they understand that they have this pluralistic ignorance happen in the society, and what can they do about it, assuming that they don't have like you or international organizations doing research?
Yeah, well, of course I would like to claim that I'm a necessary part of anything, but the truth is, I mean, the theory is very simple, and it's also quite easy to collect the data, so I'm quite expendable in that sense. The social norms are not just related to female genital cutting, but any situation where there's social pressure to conform, people's beliefs about what the true preferences are of people might be incorrect, and that third element, which is that you don't feel safe signaling that you want change. So maybe it's a taboo sort of topic for some reason. If you've got those three conditions, it's likely that pluralistic ignorance could exist. And to measure it, it's quite straightforward. So to confirm that that was the case, the baseline survey simply said, what would you like your village to do? And what do you think everybody else would like to do? And we just measured them and see whether they're different or not. And if they're different in the same direction, people always underestimate support for change, then it's likely you've got pluralistic ignorance. So since running the project in Somalia, I've run a few workshops for NGOs where I teach them how to design these survey questions, particularly on topics where people may not feel super safe giving an honest answer. So for instance, in the IFLS or other Indonesian surveys, there are some questions that are a bit sensitive if you ask directly. There are ways to protect your respondents' anonymity as well. And so I teach a few of those methods. But essentially, it's adding a few questions into survey on a topic that meets those three criteria that I mentioned before. So for instance, I know the IFLS survey is a little bit delayed at the moment, so maybe that's an opportunity to sneak a few questions in. Yeah.
Right. Probably something more concrete, because you have been in Indonesia for the last few weeks. Do you have like an example or an issue where the social norm, particularly the harmful social norms or pluralistic ignorance, might play a role, like specific things in Indonesia?
Yeah. So I don't pretend that I know that much about
from your
Indonesian culture, but because I come from a position of ignorance, I gave a lecture actually just yesterday, and in that lecture we did a live experiment where I asked the Indonesian audience to tell me what they truly felt about some topics and what they thought everybody else in the group thought about the topics. It's essentially all you need to do. And we did it anonymously online, so they felt some confidence that they could express their true beliefs. Sometimes their preferences and what they thought the group would say matched up, and other times they were wildly different. Some of the ones where they were different, because they're the most interesting ones, were when I asked, do you wish that there was less sugar in Jogja food? And almost everybody said yes. But when they were asked to guess everybody else, they said, no, everybody else likes sugar. So that was the case. The majority actually thought that they were in the minority. And we did a few other examples around gender norms. I think in Indonesia, probably the areas to look at are related to gender and also related to other demographic variables like hierarchy, respect for elders, things like this. I feel like that's probably a promising area. But some of the gender norms around the husband's role in earning more money in the household, the woman's role in taking care of the children and returning to full-time work, it seemed like the norms there didn't match up with what people thought that the average felt about things. It's not clear to me whether or not these are pluralistic ignorance problems, because we'd need to try to measure all three of those necessary criteria, but it could be that there are things in these areas where social norm interventions could potentially increase welfare.
Interesting. So it has like various implications on health, on social issues, probably in poverty as well. So it's it's wide ranging.
Yeah, health is a very interesting one as well. We also talked about smoking, and I was shocked that this was the only question with 100% agreement. I said, how would you feel about Jogja actually banning smoking across the whole city? 100% of people said, good, which I didn't expect. So, but obviously smoking is a big priority for the Indonesian government, and particularly the smoking of, what's the name for the cheap cigarettes without filter? I forgot the name of them. It's
rokok kretek, but that's more on the mixed.
Okay, yeah, because these ones I know are particularly damaging for health.
Yeah.
But there's a social norm perhaps around them as well. So, obviously there are economic levers here as well that one could use. But I think combining those with a social norm type approach makes some sense.
Yeah, probably corresponding or commenting on your class, it's probably because of the students as the respondent, but if you do it in the field with common people, probably different result may come up. Yeah.
Could well be, yeah, which is why I wouldn't draw too much into my little experiment. But
Yeah.
it was interesting that even
It is.
within this class, they knew that the rest of the class were UGM economics students, and still the beliefs didn't match up with their own preferences. So, but of course you're right, going to the field is the only way to get information before you roll out an expensive intervention.
Okay, final question from me. If you could change like one persistent bad norm in society, what would it be? And how would you start with the change?
Oh, that's a really good question. There are probably a lot that come to my mind, but in Australia, which is I guess where my heart lies for a lot of these things, I feel like drinking alcohol is a particularly damaging social norm that we've made a lot of progress on, but has long-ranging consequences. I'm particularly drawn to social norms where the behaviour has negative externalities on those around you, and alcohol abuse is particularly one that hurts not just yourself but your family, your society, your children, and sometimes strangers if you're driving a car as well. We've made a lot of progress there, but I think it's something that we can speed up towards towards really reducing that abuse. A problem you don't have as much in
Not as
Indonesia.
much, yeah.
I mean, as we were talking about good and bad, so obviously having a country that's more homogenous in terms of religion and ethnicity leads to much stronger social controls, which can be good in some ways. Alcohol, I think, is one, and perhaps not so good in other ways.
Agree with that. All right, so David, thank you for sharing your insight, your research with us. And it reminds me to our understanding of behavior is important as part of society. And to everyone who listen and who view this video, if you want to learn more, you may as well check David's research papers in the link below in YouTube. And again, thank you, David, for being with us in the last couple of weeks and also participating in the podcast. Thank you for watching, for the listener and viewers, and I'll see you in another research series episode. Thank you.